It's WOR Tonight with Joe Concha and guest co-host Cooper Lawrence.
And joining us on the program, a New Jersey criminal defense lawyer, anchor at the Law and Crime Network, a former prosecutor in my home state of New Jersey. Please welcome Bob Bianchi to the program. Bob, Joe Concha, Cooper Lawrence, thanks for joining.
Hey, it's a pleasure, guys. How you doing?
Well, we're doing all right. So I'm sure you're paying close attention to this whole situation happening with Jeffrey Epstein and what happened in a New York City jail cell earlier this week. I know we're not supposed to speculate too much in this business, but what the hell? It's a Friday. What do you think happened? Was he trying to off himself, or was he just trying to get out of that particular jail?
You know, it's hard to say, Joe. Of course, like you said, we can speculate, but it's something squirrely's going on. Like the cellmate that he had doesn't have the history of this. He's being monitored very closely. So whether it's a suicide potential or to try to get himself into a better position with regard to his bail status is obviously very possible, although I can tell you none of those efforts will work at all with respect to his bail condition. The only thing it'll accomplish is having tighter security with respect to monitoring him. So, I mean, it's a crazy, wacky scenario, just like the entire case is, which, may I add, is a complete disgrace as a prosecutor that a 53-page indictment is quashed with a non-prosecution agreement, and this guy's allowed to go back out, and not only the victims that he had already victimized, but then go back out and re-victimize young people. I can tell you from many years having made the calls on cases like this, that this was a complete corrupt act by the U.S. Attorney's Office led by Mr. Acosta.
And he's no longer the labor secretary in the Trump administration.
Because of this, yeah. I think the most egregious thing about this that is just, at least it's enraged me and my friends, is Epstein trying to say that, well, this little 13-year-old girl was a prostitute, so she had asked him for money, so what was he supposed to do? As if a 13-year-old could be a prostitute, as if that isn't the definition of trafficking, am I right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's really disgusting the way that this was phrased. I mean, you're going back to what the non-prosecution agreement was. So, in other words, the 53-page... See, I'm starting to get excited, guys, all right? The 53-page indictment is out there, right? So they have enough evidence to go after him over what are probably some of the most horrific sex trafficking crimes that you can think of, and then soliciting other teenage girls to bring more victims into his lair. So they're ready to drop those charges. Then Acosta goes to a secret meeting at the Marriott. I can tell you guys, as being a head of an agency, you would never see me outside of my office on campus speaking to a defense lawyer in a case without an investigator present for every part of that conversation. And mind you, this is during a period of time when Mr. Acosta is leaving, probably going to leave office because Obama is coming in. Then miraculously, after their little coffee clutch, this 53-page indictment is quashed. Then the federal prosecutor somehow, which I have never heard in 33 years of practice in law, is now involved in working out a state plea, which, by the way, in and of itself was anemic. And then the whole thing goes away for naught. So, yeah, it's outrageous. And then, to your point, they start calling these girls who are not of the age of consent, who are being trafficked, prostitutes. It's outrageous. I can't even believe that somebody didn't blow the whistle, the cops, the people investigating it, because there's not a person in the world who could possibly believe that that was not a corrupt prosecution. And my last point are for all those little people out there who trip over some technical violations of the law that go to jail for a really, really, really long time. They're, I'm sure, outraged as well by the cushy treatment that this guy got, Mr. Epstein.
And we're talking with Bob Bianchi. He obviously is an anchor on the Law and Crime Network. I'm curious to get your thoughts on the Muller testimony that happened on Wednesday, and particularly from a performance perspective, there is almost no one on the planet, save for a couple of people that are blind partisans, that think that went well in terms of him asking for questions to be repeated something like 147 times and him just not having a basic grasp on the contents of his own report. How did you see it, Bob?
I saw it exactly that way, Joe, and I was surprised and a little dismayed. I believe Mueller is an honorable guy. I believe he's given honorable service, and I believe in a very difficult scenario he tried to get to the right place. But I was shocked that he wasn't able to answer basic questions about the content of the report that you should not need a reference to. In fact, the Democrats were kind of teeing it up and laying it up with a visual of the quotes from the report, and he was asking what page is that on, and didn't understand some basic information. Now, he ultimately delivered the goods for what they wanted, but he did it in one-word answers. True. Yes. In the instances in which he did remember the report. But it seemed to me, we were all talking about, like, gosh, did the guy even read the report? It could be a matter of age, pressure. I feel bad for the guy, to be honest with you. I don't think that sullies his reputation at all, but it was surprising.
Bob Bianchi, as a former prosecutor, I'm really curious. I don't know if you're following the Curtis Flowers case that the Supreme Court had a rule on. The big issue was that there was many Batson violations. Curtis Flowers is somebody who was wrongfully convicted, it looks like, but the prosecutor kept going after him 6 times. So he would stick him in jail, the guy would get an appeal, stick him back in jail, the guy would get an appeal. Now, finally, Kavanaugh's the one who wrote the decision on it, and they ruled in favor of Curtis Flowers, saying that, you know what, it was a Batson violation. We don't really see any evidence here. So in that scenario, does a prosecutor go after somebody a 7th time?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the case, but I can just tell you as a general principle, after a certain period of time, you may get a situation in which 1 or 2 times you're going after an individual, but you don't just continue to hammer and pound a person because you can't secure a conviction and ultimately seeking just to do whatever you can to get the guy in jail. That's not the way prosecutors operate. You either have the sufficient evidence to do it or not, and for the Supreme Court to turn around and say that there wasn't sufficient evidence is obviously disturbing. And guys, I've been look, I'm a prosecutor in my DNA. And I love the job. It was the best job I ever had in my life. But, we swear an oath to do justice, not to merely seek and get convictions. And I know some folks will say that's Pollyannic and that's not really the way most prosecutors are. No, that's the way most prosecutors really are. So when we see egregious acts like this, it harms us because it sullies the reputation of what prosecutors are supposed to be doing. But I will tell you, there are a number of things that I've been seeing recently now as a defense lawyer that's out there. And I'm like, wow, you were breaching the ethical requirements of what prosecutors are supposed to be doing in this fury of just hammer people. I used to call it hitting a fly with a sledgehammer. And anything goes now. And you have courts that are just basically whatever the prosecutor says goes. And even when I was a prosecutor, I wanted a good fight from the defense. I never did anything with discovery violations, hiding anything. My book was open. Here you go. Let's go, in court. We'll fight it out. We'll duke it out, and where justice is at the end of the day, the jury will make the call. But I'm seeing less and less of due process protections for defendants recently, and it's getting very concerning, and somebody needs to step in and do something about it.
We're speaking with Law and Crime anchor Bob Bianchi. I'm curious, Bob, your thoughts on the federal death penalty executions coming back after 16 years. Where do you fall on that as a former prosecutor? Are they more effective in reducing crime? Does it help the victims' families have some sort of closure? What are your feelings on this?
Well, I was a baby prosecutor. I was trying murder and death penalty cases, so I'm a person who really stood in the courtroom and actually sought an execution of individuals. And I have to tell you, you're going to be surprised at this answer. I have become an opponent to the death penalty based upon that experience. I think it's torturous to the family, first off. Secondarily, I think there are so many disparities in the manner in which it is applied. Racially speaking, there is no question that black and brown people are executed at a higher rate. I'm concerned about the fact that with the advent of recent science like DNA, we've been able to exonerate many people who were convicted and sitting for death penalty cases. And Joe, my last point of that is like when I became the Morris County prosecutor, the death penalty was just being phased out in Jersey, but I think I have 21 of the murder cases we had here in Morris, 20 of them were filed as death penalty cases. Now, right across the line, Joe, as you know, if I step over this imaginary line, I wind up in Essex County. In Essex County, there were virtually no cases that were filed as death penalty cases. So it really shows you the disparity of that. It's the prosecutor's discretion as to what's being filed as a death penalty or not. And to me, committing a crime in one jurisdiction or stepping over the line and committing it in another shouldn't be the basis upon which we put a needle in somebody's arm and execute them.
That's amazing. I had no idea that there was that happened between Morris and Essex, for instance. And I know Cooper is big on firing squads. Where do you come down on that, Bob?
Well, the manner of execution has been a big problem with the Supreme Court. But Joe, can I just go back to I'm sorry, I didn't answer the federal death penalty be reinstituted here. Yeah. Something that I think is interesting is, look, I get that the audience will see, and they have thankfully selected the worst of the worst. Many of these 5 cases involved children. The evidence against it was very, very compelling. But so that's a good thing. If you're going to do it, it should be reserved for those cases that you're absolutely 110% convinced, and that those cases are ones that warrant it because of the victims. I'll tell you a case that I had, a murder case one time, where I would have argued as a defense lawyer as a manslaughter as opposed to a murder, but they wanted to argue a straight out not guilty. So let's put that in perspective. They want to say he didn't do it. He wasn't the person that participated in this at all, as opposed to he participated at it, but he didn't really intend to kill the person. It was a fight that went awry, and unfortunately this person died manslaughter. Well, the jury didn't buy that, so they came back with the murder conviction of the guy and imposed a capital murder sentence upon the person. So,
wow.
It was the defense lawyering or the defendant. In fact, the defendant may have said, I don't want to argue that it was manslaughter. I want you to go in and argue I didn't do it. I'll never know the answer to that question.
Yeah.
But a tactical decision like that can make a huge difference in the outcome of a trial, if you get my point.
He's convinced me. I'm now anti-death penalty.
No, you're not.
I changed in 5 minutes. He made some good arguments, I have to say.
He made good arguments, but you haven't changed your mind that quickly.
All right. He is an anchor at the Law and Crime Network and a former prosecutor in my great state of New Jersey. Bob Bianchi, you have a good weekend.
Okay, guys. Thanks so much.